Thanks for tuning in to Flow at the Source, where leaders like you share the ideas that help them improve flow and business performance. Welcome to Flow at the Source. This is episode number 3 with Joe Venturato and Bill Bandon. Thanks to both of you for making the time for this. It's really a great honor to be with you, both of you. Number one, Joe, I think I approached you more than 6 months ago about the idea, and you had the great idea of including Bill. So this is an interesting time to have a good conversation. Number one, just briefly, Joe Venturato has been 40 years with GE, so a good part of his career was there as a senior finance person, a procurement leader, a global supply chain leader, supplier risk, acquisition and integration, and has done significant work with integrations and divestitures in the company. So he was, full disclosure, my skip level manager for a good part of my career. And Bill Bandon was a attorney, so he's the executive for technology, sourcing, and operations. And again, an amazing opportunity to have people who had been in the trenches and have done some of this work. So the idea here now is, again, thanks. And if you have anything to correct what I said, it will be very helpful.
Well, Tomas, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
My entire career was with General Electric, and I came up through the finance ranks, as you said, and literally became the general manager of a banking enterprise for GE overseas. And I was pulled into sourcing as a need. I was asked if I would come and create an organization. And so for me, it was a work in progress. And it was actually quite fulfilling. We spent countless hours building an organization that spans 61 countries around the globe, putting in a global system. And Bill and I think I spent more time with Bill than I did my own family at certain points in my life.
I believe you.
That's about right.
I believe you.
So thank you again for having us, and I look forward to this discussion.
Tomas, it's a real pleasure to see you again after so long. Just as a little bit of background, I am an attorney. My focus is in technology law and outsourcing mostly. I worked with Joe for over 13 years. Actually, more than that, because I was outside counsel before I was recruited by Joe and our general counsel, Elizabeth, to come inside to GE Consumer Finance and then GE Capital. It was a real pleasure to help create an organization that really standardized a lot of process, especially in the face of some real crises. We experienced the financial crisis within GE Capital, and our ability to pivot what was a growing sourcing organization to a sourcing organization that had to solidify its risk management and solidify its processes in the face of upcoming regulation before the divestiture was some of the most interesting and best work, and especially with a team like Joe's team, and including you. So
thank you. And again, so the good, I think a good setup for the conversation, and again, I think it's genius that Joe thought to include you, is a big part of the sourcing work includes managing the risks. And this is where legal comes in. People sometimes think sourcing, I'll bring them in to help me paper a deal. And when actually this is about risk management. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I can tell you, when working with the organization, the discipline and the stewardship from the legal team was incredible. So I appreciated the collaboration of your team. Your attorneys in the group were dedicated to
Yeah,
all of
I was very fortunate to have had an awesome team of about a dozen people at the largest point supporting the global operations in that area.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and to hear a sourcing person say that it's good to work with legal, that's a strange. So
we'll keep that secret to your listeners. So
we'll keep. But I look, Joe, the one again working with your organization is it was actually a great thing for me. I learned a ton, and I have been in sourcing for a number of years, so I have been around the block. But the kind of care for having every a deal very well documented. Agreements don't move forward unless you really have agreement inside the organization. So when you look at sourcing and procurement, really working, not just processing transaction, but working with the stakeholders, what kind of advantage do you feel they create for the company? And if you can just drop in a story about it, that's even better.
Let me start with, having been a CFO and then a general manager, I always had a seat at the table. But having the seat doesn't mean it's automatic respect within the organization. And one of the things that I found when I came in to the sourcing role, which is different than procurement, and I'll get into that in a minute, is I wanted sourcing to have a seat at the table. So one of the must-haves that I requested was that I be at the C level. I report right into a senior vice president, and I have a seat at the table. And that's just a starter. Because if you're going to have an effective sourcing organization, you've got to develop relationships across all of the C levels, whether it's marketing, whether it's IT, whether it's operations, finance, it doesn't matter. Each and every one of them. And you've got to work with them on their strategic areas, and you've got to satisfy their needs, because at the end of the day, the labor, let's say, component of what we do is quite small compared to the items that we source from outside, be it on the IT side, software, various services, be it legal, be it on the IT side or the risk side, because a lot of that flows right back into the IT side. But you've got to be there. And if you're not there, what I would call in terms of having early involvement, then you miss the boat and you become reactive. And so to me, that's the key, is doing that. And then you've got to move beyond that. You've got to have common systems. I mean, when I started, we had not a clue what was happening across 61 countries. And, you start off by doing it at a very high level manually. Then you finally get you're able to implement a global system. At the end, I could sit in my office in the US. I could see exactly what they were doing in Japan, in Australia, in Austria, in Canada, in Ireland, you name it. And then you can start to get truly strategic in your sourcing endeavors to meet the strategic needs by bringing in global partners. People will die to get a contract to do something across 61 countries. Now, are all of them capable? No. And that's part of the decision-making process. But you've got to get the buy-in at that C level in order to do a global contract. You've got to show the benefits. And when you're doing that, it's not just about well, this cost $1 today. I'm going to get it for 75 cents tomorrow. It's about showing the value. It's about the quality, the responsiveness. All of those things flow together over the life of that contract. Then you've got to have a whole reporting process. And if you're just reporting stuff for the sake of reporting, it's not worth the effort. It's got to be actionable. You have to have owners. And every time you sit down to review some type of written report, it can't be, well, tell me about this. It's got to be dealing with issues. It's got to be dealing with resolution. People have to own it. And not just on the sourcing side. You have to have people that are with you and partnering in the functional side as well. Those are the things that are the key. And if you do that, showing the value to the business is not a difficult thing.
Thanks for watching. And a brief pause to ask you for a big favor. If you find this content relevant to you or people in your network, will you please subscribe and help us spread the word? This will help us grow as a community and secure guests and topics that are always more relevant to your journey. Thanks again for tuning in. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And the bell.
And I can't say enough about how much I agree with what Joe had said, because it's equally applicable to in the involvement of your legal advisory and legal support teams to be there at the beginning. If you're not in the room, in the staff meetings for your supported functions, you had indicated that I was counsel to technology, to sourcing, and to operations. At the end, it was required that me or one of the members of my team were in the meetings, for the staff meetings on a regular basis, to understand where strategy and where significant transactions were being thought of, how did they fit within the strategic platform, and how we could help support that by both ensuring the basic thing, a prioritization of my resource capabilities in terms of can we get this done within the right amount of time. But it was also important to get the ability to say, you guys need to think about some of the restrictions in this particular area. You're looking to do something on a global basis, but you need to take into account the regulatory or the liability profile, particularly with regard to the use of data. We were in a business of finance, and so personal data became a significant issue across the globe during the tenure that we had from the beginning of the millennium to when capital was finally divested. It really became a much more effective legal support, as opposed to what historically people think of us as, which is they sit at their desks with their little green eye shades, and people come in and say, I've negotiated the deal, quote unquote, just put it on paper. And there you are doing the due diligence post facto, after you should have been doing the due diligence on some of the risk factors that go into the documents, such that you're protecting your client and you're protecting the company from both the risks and enabling the right kind of what the client understands the commercial the commercial deal to be. Right, Joe? I mean,
I totally agree with that. And when everyone thinks if they can buy an automobile, that they know how to be a sourcing person. In the long term, they're basically buying a car. Mm-hmm. And they've probably left a lot of money and other things on the table and have no clue that they've done that. But the reality is you have experts in the various areas. And if you work collaboratively together, you're going to always have a far better outcome than somebody just going off and saying, paper the deal. That's the last thing you want to do. in an organization because you missed a lot of opportunities. I mean, one example I'll give you just on the operational side is when you have banks in all these various countries, if you think about it, at that time, and even today, banks print a heck of a lot of stuff. I mean, they have to do mailings every month. They have to do annuals. I mean, you think about all the work they have to do. So every organization had its own little printing guy that had no scale, had no commonality of capabilities or anything. But they were their guy. And so what we did is we went to RR Donnelley and said, look, we're not going to guarantee you're going to get 61 countries, but we'll give you a shot at this. And we ended up, I would say, probably covering 50 of the 61 because there were unique regulatory requirements and different things, and also just logistical issues. But it was a win-win. And when you rippled that through and you needed to make changes, it was easy. At one point of contact, if you had an issue, one resolution channel, and that definitely paid dividends. And Bill, I think you can talk to what we did on the IT side in terms of standardization and processing.
Yeah. I mean, outsourcing as a discipline needs contracts that can function as both an operator's manual and as essentially a constitution and a set of statutes that people can live by, because what you're doing is you're ensuring that the capabilities that currently are being performed in-house or with several other smaller providers are being undertaken as if the outsourcer were you. Now, granted, they have to make money. Mm-hmm. If you're essentially outsourcing to somebody where you're trying to negotiate the absolute best and possibly onerous deal, you're going to set your own entity up for failure because you're likely to not get an understanding, which is another reason why attorneys, even if they're not, quote, business people, do need to be in there a little bit earlier, because you need to understand how the outsourcer or how the vendor makes money. What's their business model? Does it fit cheek by jowl with the way you make money? Because if they make money in a way that undermines your ability to undertake the business, they're not the right vendor. And that poses a bit of a risk. I think on the technology side, there's a lot of things that you need to take into account at the beginning of the transaction. These days, you need to do an AI review. You need to make sure that the data that's being used from as a customer, and we are speaking as customer counsel and customer advisors here, sourcing as a user rather than undertaking transactions as a seller of services. But we also have to keep in mind that sometimes we're sourcing things in that are then going to be turned around and sold. So we always have to keep our commercial counterparts at our organization in mind. But we have to take into account what is the use of the data that's going to go into artificial intelligence. We have to ensure that the use of data meets our commercial understanding of the value of the data, and that we're extracting both the right value and keeping it confidential when it needs to be kept confidential. We have we need the ability to be able to say, can these are we enabling the right kind of due diligence, both from data security, from financial security, from operational capabilities, operational risk. The ability for the attorneys to be able to assist in that particular area, not necessarily to run the transaction, but to be there so that they're not trying to get this information after the fact on a secondhand basis from somebody who thinks that they understand the deal rather than hearing it directly. I think that becomes very important.
Interesting. And again, this is very interesting because the similar setup for, and when we think about flow in a business,
Right,
is like going to that Gemba, the people that do the actual work, is connecting with those stakeholders. And I do have a question, Joe. That this is for you, but we can both add. So when you're creating flow, this is as a function that is serving other functions. What does that look like at scale? So you talk about 61 countries, right? So you have direct and indirect sourcing. You were buying more airplanes than anybody on this planet. Not only airplanes that are customized for a specific client, and aircraft engines and other components, but at the same time buying the services that we needed to run a company. So when you do that at scale, how do you do it so that you can go home at some point to your family?
Well, first of all, you have to look at what scale means in that context, because in the context of the aircraft and the kit outs and all of that, that was very specific to one business. And the scale comes from whatever the scale they have. They just happen to be the number one procurer of airplanes and number one lessee in the world. So we had built-in scale. And there, the best thing you can do is hire the best people you can find, give them parameters and let them go. And you've got to define the sandbox, because they're going to be there. They're going to be sitting there day in, day out, eating, breathing this. And you've got to create the processes so that it's almost like an assembly line, how they go about it. And they're moving through it, and it's not a panic. It's just a flow. And the reporting has to really get at what is, how do you spell success? And it's not, as I said before, it's not just price. It's the whole waterfront, so to speak, in terms of quality, value, timeliness. All of those things factor in. Now, when you look at things that are more what I would call universal, like I mentioned, the printing, that's one thing. When you look at the IT world, if your goal is to have common systems across a number of countries or across the globe, you're going to approach that a little differently. But the principle is exactly the same, whether it's 5 or 61. It's just, what are you dealing with in terms of the size, and your expectations are going to be different depending on that. And there, you're going to pull that up. You're not going to leave it to one organization. You're going to create a group that's going to manage that, working with the key stakeholders, and not just the stakeholders at corporate, but in the affected countries, because you want the buy-in at that level. It can't be a push down. It's got to be a mutual pull and push in that case. And that's how you spell success. When you roll that out and it's successful. And, and the area that I think we were probably the most successful in terms of scale was on the IT side.
Yeah.
Because we had a CIO and we had local CIOs who drove for standardization, because they understood the more we could do at scale, the cheaper it was going to be, the higher the quality,
the safer it would be.
And the safer it would be. And we could de-risk it that way.
Yeah.
And, for instance, I'll just use one operational example that isn't necessarily in the IT, but it gets at the risk. And that is, we had one business, which will remain nameless, that their local regulatory requirement was, when somebody took a loan, they had to sit down, and let's say it's a 3-year loan, and write out 36 checks with the appropriate dates. Those 36 checks were then put in a storage, and every month they were picked and cashed. Now, when I went to look at that, first of all, the warehouse they were in was all built of wood. There was no fire suppression. The little boxes they put the checks in were made of wood. The number of people that had access to all of that was infinitesimal. I mean, there were lots of people that had access to those checks. There was no real good controls to say they got it, the checks, other than somebody sending a dunning letter to the person, and the person says, no, I wrote those checks.
Right.
So it was, to me, it just spelled risk in capital letters. And we had to get that out of there, go with what I would call a supplier that had quality and scale and systems to handle it. So what did we do? We pulled in somebody that we had used in other countries who had a presence in that country, and we de-risked the whole thing.
Yeah, it's
awesome. And this is great. And again, I can't believe that even working with the team, I'm learning so much today. And I spend a lot more time with your other attorneys than with you.
Yeah.
You were always busy, but
they were always busy. They were always busy too. So
no, it was great. But when you look at serving the business, and when you look at legal policies, standards, what are the things that you dream about and thought about to help the work move? Because there's a lot. Like, and I say busy is not a knock on the team. It is a lot. We put a lot of flow through your shop. I can speak for one area. For one of the businesses that we serve, we had to help the deal team generate advisory contracts, consultant contracts, day in and day out. So it was like a supply chain. We ended up having to create a short form master services agreement for those type of engagements where you still need to mitigate the risk, but you also needed to size it up. The amount of dollars spent was not high enough to justify a full-blown contract. But at the same time, you needed to address all the risk areas. And we were able to put something together that kept that flow.
yeah,
We worked together with the team. But I only have exposure to some of those creative approaches. So if you can talk a little bit more about that creativity to empower teams. Right?
So there's a lot to unpack in your question. So let me just take a step back. The first step is to have quality team members. We assembled a bunch of people with whom I had been familiar with in my career prior to joining General Electric, who had practiced in the areas of law that were critical in success in those particular areas, whether they had come in from a privacy area or whether they had come in from an operational area. They were all part of a team. The best way of saying that how to create a particular standard is to have an understanding of the marketplace in which you're discussing. The business that you were supporting in that particular area had a particular segment of the financial services marketplace where the nature of the type of services that we were sourcing in were going to be slightly different, but significantly different in terms of the nature of the output that they were going to need to have. And so the attorneys need to always keep current in those particular areas. That would need to be mapped against standards of here's what we typically can accept in terms of risk. Here's what we typically can accept in terms of operational reporting requirements, in terms of our necessary commercial understandings. We were at General Electric, and at GE, cash is king. So cash flow was everything. You have to make sure that the agreements reflected our focus on ensuring that we had that kind of commercial element, and to accommodate where the vendor understood that from us, but there may have been they had the same concerns. Being there early and having a great, strong sourcing process to lean into made the attorney's job that much more effective. If you've got the right diligence and sourcing process at the beginning, if you know what the need is, if you know how it fits within the tech stack or the operational services environment, how it would then foster what the outcomes were intended to be. You're sourcing it for a reason. Ensure that the contract focuses on ongoing contract management post signing to measure, report, measure, and oversee how those things were there. You would be able to get those particular areas there. We at GE, as a customer, were dealing with companies that were so large that it was difficult to push templates. But you could always have standards such that you can then compare those standards against those particular contracts. At the time that I was there, which was, back in the teens, that typically was by hand. You would review the contracts, which is why the smart people were really, really critical so that they can achieve a flow. In the 20s, now that we have artificial intelligence, AI is transforming the attorney's role in that particular area. We have access to tools that can take our standards and give you a first cut at the application of those standards against a contract review that should more than half, if not cut into like a third, the time that we can generate a response draft and still meet our standards, and can do it consistently because the machine is applying your playbook against those particular reviews. It's amazing. And again, that playbook pulls in what Joe needs from a sourcing standards point of view on supplier risk, on outcomes, et cetera. But it should also pull in what the clients need. I know I'm running on a little bit long here, but I think it's really important to say that the process starts with engagement, inclusion, ensuring that you're capturing the stakeholder needs at the beginning, both at a local, a global, and an operational functional level. So,
and the only thing I will add is I just emphasize it's the early engagement.
Right. Early.
It's being there at the table. It's being there. And, the one thing that I will say, in 40 years with GE loved to solve challenges, problems. And if you're there and work collaboratively, it's understanding the need early and working to solve whatever the challenge is, to deliver, to meet that need. And so a lot of what you were describing in terms of these short form contracts was there was a need that we identified it early. We worked collaboratively and we were able to put it in place and keep it simple and get everything out of it we needed. And you don't get that every day. That takes trust on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, are we going to use it correctly?
Right.
Yeah. No, this is. I think you touched on a lot of the next question I had, but just get a new flavor of it. When you look at management practices versus reporting. So sometimes there's a lot of reports that perhaps just fly off and don't do anything. I do remember, and again, I do remember how a lot of your organization, we actually had daily meetings on metrics, and but not just metrics, specific drilling down in the report. And I somehow feel that there was a similar rhythm and cadence. So management structures versus reporting, so that we get the report created in time.
Well, I think, first of all, the management structures have to be effective in themselves in terms of managing an enterprise and developing the strategy and a direction for it. The reporting, for reporting's sake, is a waste of time. Your reporting needs to be actionable, needs to have owners, and it has to be really focused on not a piece of paper that somebody's going to take and literally put in a file and say, "Oh, that was nice. I got this." And go ahead.
Yeah, and can I just jump in? The same is true, not just of reporting in terms of management reports, but of service levels generally. If you're holding your particular vendor to a accountable to a host of service levels that really are not material, what you're doing is you're doing a lot of make work on both sides of the transaction. They've got to measure the service levels. They've got to report them to you. And you need to actually staff people to handle the service levels. If you can just be judicious in both reporting requirements and in what are the service levels that matter, everybody wins in that area, because then you're focusing on keep your metrics to under a half a dozen, unless you're in a much more complex circumstance. But most contracts and most outsourcing contracts, you can probably get effective service level management and reporting management with things anywhere from up to about 6 particular measures.
And in addition to that, you've got it. In addition to being actionable, I'll expound on that a little bit. You have to have owners. You have to have due dates to get things resolved, and you have to hold people accountable to get it done. And there will always be circumstances where things will have to be adjusted, but you've got to start with a fundamental that it's got to be actionable and making it real, and it's felt. For instance, if you have a service level that says, I can only have 1 hour of outages a month or something, right, and they're running 2 hours. Okay, who owns it? What is the root cause? What is the time frame to resolve this? And go. And then it's literally follow, right, and adjust as need be.
Right.
This is again, we covered quite a bit. So on the last question that is prepared, and then we're going to have just a moment to wrap it up, is this, in the legal processes, and not a lot of the things that we did, we enforce policy, not just legal, but sourcing. So if we're not careful, we can actually become the people that put a roadblock to the business. So from your perspective, when our requirements to mitigate risk, which is similar to what the legal function has, when they can get in the way from the outside appear bureaucracy.
Oh.
So what are the things because you're going to get pressure. There are people this happens in all the best organizations, way high up, that will try to outrank anybody of us. And how do you just hey, look, keeping
Yeah. So in terms of policy and in terms of standards, if you're trying to enforce a policy, as Joe said earlier, from the top down and not explaining why you have established a particular standard, it's not an effective policy. Policies need to be driven through engagement, inclusion, making sure that you understand how the business operates, such that if you see that a certain method of operation is not meeting a particular legal, a particular commercial or other operational concern or a risk standard, you get together and you're like, well, what's the best methodology to be able to ensure the proper behavior? And you set a policy of a particular set of principles. You'll have a mission or a particular goal. You'll have a policy that sets the principles that need to be embodied. You'll have a process in terms of here's how we get the policy in there, and then you'll have more procedures and forms to be able to ensure that that process was there. If you will have a roadblock if the policy is really something that hasn't. Well, first of all,
if it's aspirational,
if it is aspirational, if it's not something that can be achieved, a policy is going to be ineffective. Second, don't just throw the policy up on a website and say you have to comply with it. If you're not doing training and you're not reinforcing the training and then reinforcing the training again, the policy is not there. Right? Right. The IT security guys have learned this lesson. Unfortunately, typically through areas where they've got exposure. But for the most part, most organizations have IT security organizations now that reinforce training, because that's the best way of getting the policy in there, not necessarily just the technological aspects. And it's the same with lawyers. It's the same with the sourcing policies. I think it becomes really important to ensure that the policies are reviewed, that they are trained on, and that they work together. You know, in a large organization, you'll have a treasury policy, or you'll have a data security policy, or you'll have an HR policy. They may say things that conflict with each other unless you're doing it in a collaborative area. Effective policy management is an underserved area in many organizations.
So in a way, I'm hearing is policies need to be reconciled with each other.
Oh, absolutely.
Otherwise, yeah.
They do. And let me give you an example. When the Fed took over supervision of GE Capital, the level of standard that they set for policies was much different than the prior regulator. So we embarked on literally, I would call it a rewrite of the sourcing policies.
Bottom up.
And procedures. And we engaged with the sourcing leaders across every country. And I don't know how many drafts we went through and iterations, et cetera. And the key thing that the one thing we said from the beginning is this cannot be an aspirational policy or procedure. And we need to keep it real while still meeting the requirements of the Fed. In the end, we were successful on two fronts. One, we got a policy and we got procedures written.
Yeah.
But more importantly, every one of the sourcing leaders had to sign off on it. And number two, they had to get the general managers of those businesses, those banks, I should say, to sign off on it. And then three, we put it into an education program that was online. So individuals who engaged with sourcing in each country would have to go through an education process to demonstrate they had a fundamental understanding of that policy. And the other thing we did is, and if you think about it, there's nuances in language. So we had to literally translate those policies into all of the host countries' languages while ensuring that we weren't losing anything in translation
Right.
as you
Right.
go through.
You couldn't just put it into a translation program without
You
understanding.
just can't put it into a translator.
The concepts don't travel all the time.
Yeah. And I think it's important that it's not just the sign off on the policy, but in the drafting of the policy, the Fed had particular requirements. Each of the local regulators had requirements, and sometimes those requirements either conflicted or they were a different way of slicing the same orange. It had to be something that you had to reconcile in a policy such that the local general manager can say, hey, listen, I'm complying with both what the Fed does, as well as with what the German regulator would need to do. And that's the challenge, is to make sure that
and the other thing that we faced was, because of what I'll call the far-flung investments that GE Capital made, we owned power plants in various countries. Now, the Fed tried to make a case that those power plants should be subject to their oversight. And we said, I don't think so. And we had to work collaboratively with them to justify why and why they shouldn't be held accountable to the same policies and procedures, because that was an investment as opposed to an operation.
I think that's a really important insight. As much as we were initially looking at the Fed as a regulator under which we would try and comply, there was a huge education process that we undertook with them, because GE, as a regulated financial entity, was relatively unique in that it was owned by an industrial company, as opposed to it being the ultimate parent.
Yes.
So, and that was a challenge for the Federal Reserve to be able to understand that.
Because we also, in addition to dealing with the synergies between the policies within GE Capital, we also had to look at it from the parent as well. And there it was on two fronts. One, that we weren't doing something that was out of sync with them, but also ensuring that those requirements that were more onerous, specific to the Fed, did not end up flowing up.
Right.
Because of the organization structure. And that was another whole set of long discussions with the Fed, because in their simple mind, it should flow from GE down as opposed to there being a wall between the two.
Right.
And that was not something that was easily resolved in one discussion.
Nothing trivial about it. No.
Right. Well, it was actually a discussion that was still ongoing at the time we announced the divestiture.
Yeah.
So awesome. I know I said it earlier. I am so grateful. The depth. I'm surprised, but
we are thankful, because this was fun. I haven't had this kind of discussion with Joe in months.
This is lovely. I the one thing I get out of this, that if anything, is that even though some of that is distance between when we did this, it is still close. It's still close to you, and that sort of ownership. It's something that I value quite a lot, and I hope that the people listening to this story take note of some of the things. I have things that are kind of novel to me, even though I had been around, getting policies reconciled, which is, we kind of logically think about it that way, but do we own and do we have the wherewithal sometimes to really do that? And so Joe, when you talk about getting a seat at the C table, it's because you gotta have it. There's no way to do any reconciliation unless
without that ability.
You can hold you on in those conversations. And so we'll get more than what we expected, but I'm not surprised. So thank you so much. Any last comments?
Just thank you for having us.
No, thank you, Tomas. This was a blast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Flow at the Source, produced by TBR ChangeWorks and hosted by Tomas Reyes. These conversations aim to support the thinking that turns improvement ideas into sustainable action. We thank our guests for sharing their perspectives. Those views are their own.